we kind of went right to the center of a problem that I believe has plagued Crossroads for a very long time. The problem of being too easily offended. We are in a culture right now that is saturated with actually the encouragement to be easily offended, to take sides, to protest. It makes for a good news story, okay? So we live in a culture that actually encourages us to be offended. But that has seeped into the church, and it has seeped into Crossroads over the last several years. Let me remind you the definition that we gave to this. To be offended is to be annoyed, angry, resentful, and vengeful about a perceived insult or disregard for oneself or one's tightly held standards, principles, beliefs, views, and ideas. And I'm sorry that the enemy has gotten into our church like this over the past several years, but we've had a couple fractures because of what I just read. People being too easily annoyed, angry, resentful, vengeful about a perceived insult or disregard for oneself or one's tightly held standards, principles, beliefs, views, and ideas. But last week we turned a corner. We really did. I believe in my heart that we did. No more of that. We actually spent time in confession, confessing our perhaps private sin and corporate sin. And to be honest with you folks, we don't have time for petty offenses. We don't have time for misunderstandings that go way too far. The only thing we have time for is love and unity. And we hit those two things really, really hard last week. And I'm gonna just remind us again what those two things were from John 17. Here's the question that I asked a bazillion times last week. So hopefully you're gonna know the answer to it, okay? From John 17, how will we convince a godless world that Jesus was sent from the Father? Unity. Unity. From John 17, how will we convince a godless world that Jesus was sent from the Father? Unity. Okay? If we are not unified, what does that tell the world? It tells the world that God is not real and this is all a joke. Okay? Number 2, from John 6. How will the world know that we are disciples of Jesus? If we have love one for another. If we don't love each other, if we are constantly annoyed, angry, resentful, vengeful, and offended, if we are more fragmented than unified, the only thing that will tell the world is that God is not real, this is all a joke, and that we're really not his disciples. So we looked at several scriptures last week, such as love covers a multitude of sins and offenses, and this continues to blow me away. It is a man's glory to overlook a transgression. All right. It's a man's glory to overlook a transgression. Folks, we can't even get over each other's idiosyncrasies, let alone a transgression. We're offended at a person's weakness or a fault, let alone a sin or a transgression. That's not easy, but it's what we are called to do. And if I had a nickel for every time I've said this over the past 8 years, the kingdom of God is very what? Counterintuitive. Counterintuitive. It's not easy. It's not what we lean toward or bend toward, but it's what we are called to do. And I know that this next statement that I'm going to read to you from the Apostle Paul, I know that this is within the context of Christians bringing lawsuits against each other. But in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 7, Paul said, "Why not rather be wronged?" Okay, that's counterintuitive, isn't it? Why? Well, they wronged me. Let's get justice. We got to have some type of justice here. Paul says, don't haul somebody off to court. Don't litigate. Don't bring litigation into the picture. Why not just rather be wronged? Maybe somebody really did offend and hurt you by what they said or what they did, but why not take the high road? Why not rather be wronged? As a citizen in God's kingdom, we need to take the high road. I've said this verse also several times over the past several months because it just fits so many situations that I've been involved in. Proverbs 26, verse 20, without wood, a fire goes out. Now that's within the context of gossip, which is really true, okay? Folks, we cannot keep throwing our wood of being offended on the fire. Why? Because that just fuels it. It feeds it. Okay, we have to choke it off. All right? And it will go out. Okay, but, and here's where I'm going to turn a little bit of a corner today. But what if the sin, and I'm not going to steal your thunder, okay? He's going to preach on something in a couple weeks, I'm not going to steal it. But what if the sin or the transgression or the offense or the tension really does need to be addressed? What if it really does need to be addressed? I still believe that a lot of little annoyances and petty misunderstandings can be overlooked by just smothering somebody with love, all right? But what if the issue is so great? What if it has caused so much damage that it really does need to be confronted? What if someone is desperately in need of some honest feedback and spiritual direction because of a major blind spot? What do you do? Okay, and I just mentioned a word there that made some of you shudder, and it was the word confront. How many of you just love confrontation? Okay, so what do you do in those situations? What do you do when there's so much damage that, we got to just stop the carnage here, we got to do something. All right, I'm going to give us a couple things, a couple dots that we need to connect here this morning. The first one is from Matthew 7. From Matthew 7, and Jesus is talking about judging people here and how we should not wrongly judge someone. And Jesus also implies here that there may very well be a time when we need to talk to somebody else about an issue. But how do we do that? And he offers us this warning, several verses down in Matthew chapter 7. He asks us a few questions, and he says this: why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there is this plank in your own eye? All right, now, that doesn't make us laugh, but it probably produced a little bit of a chuckle from the crowd that Jesus was speaking to. Because Jesus was a carpenter, remember? Okay, a lot of people were carpenters. He used one of his own little illustrations from working with Joseph. And so sometimes you have to put some, well-placed humor so that actually they'll listen to what you're going to say afterwards. So that's what Jesus did here. And the point that Jesus is making is that we have this tendency to zero in on something small in someone else's life and ignore the greater issues in our own life. We will magnify the weaknesses of others, which make us look good and like we've got it all together. Did you see that dress she's wearing? It doesn't do anything for her. That poor guy, he just can't keep a job. I think he's probably just a lazy bum. Did you hear that so-and-so is struggling? It's probably that eating disorder again. Can you believe what he said on Facebook? It's obviously he's not filled with the Spirit. Did you know she left that church and started going to that other church? I think she's just looking for a man. Did you hear about their son? You do have to wonder what goes on in that house sometimes. He seems so depressed lately. He's probably hiding something. Did you see that book she's reading? I think she's going off the deep end doctrinally. That guy has got to be a creep. Did you hear what they said on the news about him last night? I noticed how she was a little snippy with her husband the other night. I hope their marriage isn't on the rocks. Did you hear he left his wife? My, what is this world coming to these days? I think she's drinking again. Thank God I don't have any addictions. You see how that works? What's happening here is that the log or the plank or the 2x4 in my own eye is actually obscuring my judgment of you. And the log or plank in your eye obscures your judgment of me. And with planks and logs in our eyes, it's impossible to see each other clearly. And yet we don't think twice about blabbering on and on about somebody, about so-and-so, and about this, that, and the other thing, and about bringing the gavel down as the judge and jury in their life. And without the ability to see clearly, we do the next best thing. Yeah, we assume, right? Can't see it clearly, so we'll just start assuming. Well, I just assumed that blah, blah, blah. An assumption based on a hypocritical hunch does not lead anywhere good, my friends. Jesus is clearly demonstrating here how ludicrous this all is, and it is ludicrous, but it is also very heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because we don't think twice about what that's doing to our relationships. It's deteriorating relationships when we do that. Jesus continues, he says, "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." You see, Jesus is opposed to judging someone, but he's not opposed to helping someone. He calls a spade and tells judgmental people exactly what they are. They are hypocrites. They are literally good actors and actresses. You act like nothing is wrong with you while you point out the discrepancies of everybody else. Do you see how that deteriorates relationships? There is a way, however, to move from being a hypocrite to a helper, but it takes a bold move. It means turning from focusing on the specks of others to becoming introspective and discerning about your own self. And my guess is that if we do that, that will be a very humbling process. If we start processing our planks, our issues, our logs, our sin, our 2x4s, our weaknesses, we will become humble people. And I believe that humility will either make us realize that the speck in somebody else's eye really isn't that big of a deal after all, or if it still is a big deal, we approach that person now in the spirit of humility, in the posture of humility that extends grace and compassion and mercy and love and forgiveness, and a desire to see that person grow into maturity. And we're going to get into that later. Instead of confronting somebody in a spirit of annoyance and anger and superiority. So first of all, if the issue between you and another person needs to be confronted and talked about, you have to remove all planks from your own eye first, which will hopefully start this transformation process from a hypocritical person into a humble person. And only then, in a spirit of true humility, can we even hope to help someone else see how their actions and words have caused harm to the relationship. If we are not willing to go through the process of self-evaluation and self-humbling, then we have no right to go after the speck in somebody else's eye. Secondly, we need to understand that confrontation is good. All right, again, very counterintuitive. We have to change our minds that confrontation is a bad thing. And here's where I would like to introduce another word. I've used it once, but I'm going to unpack it more here. I want to introduce the term feedback. If the word confrontation has been ruined for you, maybe a less scary word like feedback will help, okay? If the issue between you and another person needs to be confronted and talked about, approach it more with the posture of feedback. And I want to give you two very crucial ingredients for good feedback from Ephesians 4, verses 14 and 15. It's familiar to you, all right? But I want to unwrap this in the context of good feedback. Number one, good feedback needs to be truthful. Truthful. No exaggerations, no assumptions, no hearsay, no bias, no prejudice, no, I heard this from somebody else at the church. Here's what Paul said in Ephesians 4, and he's actually, in that whole chapter, he's actually talking about unity and how to nurture unity and maturity within the church. And he says this in verses 14 and 15, "We will no longer then be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead," verse 15, "speaking the," let's finish it, "truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ." Okay, listen very carefully. This is so crucial. We maintain unity and promote maturity by speaking the truth to each other. Good feedback includes making sure you have the facts. Don't speak your mind. Don't speak your own opinion. And definitely don't speak what somebody else has said. We need to eliminate from our vocabulary these words. And there are others who think the same thing. If I ever hear that phrase again, I'm going to blow a gasket. I'm just being really raw with you here, folks. Eliminate that phrase from our church. Do not bring someone else's words into an offense that you have with someone else. Don't weigh your part of the scale down with hearsay that never makes it on Judge Judy anyway. All right? We have to eliminate that phrase from our body here. Okay, back to speaking truth. If you need to, and I made this mistake a couple months ago, and I'll be very upfront with you, what I'm speaking about today, I have not mastered. I made this mistake a couple weeks ago with a group of people. If you need to, start off with asking clarifying questions. Don't assume that you have the whole truth. Usually the truth is somewhere between your perspective and the other person's perspective. Remember what Jesus said, the truth will set you free. The truth will be freeing. The truth will bring freedom. The truth will bring clarity to the issue. My friends, make sure that when you give feedback to someone or you confront them about something, make sure you've got the truth. Make sense? All right, number 2. Good feedback is always done in love. Not anger, not annoyance, not out of a spirit of offense, not out of spite. And speaking in love does not just mean a loving tone. I do think a loving tone is crucial. But speaking in love goes beyond tone. I mean, you can tell somebody really nicely that they're an idiot and a jerk and you hate them. Okay? It's not just tone. Remember what Paul is addressing here in Ephesians 4. He's speaking to them about maturity, about no longer being infants, okay? The really raw way of saying it is stop acting like babies. And a part of loving each other well is helping each other mature from one stage to the next. We are speaking the truth in love to each other because Our desire for one another is that we all mature. I'm giving you feedback, not to satisfy myself because I'm annoyed with you. I'm giving you feedback because I want what's best for you. I want you to be the best you there is. I care about you. I care about your maturity. I care about the maturity of the whole body. There's actually a pretty humorous picture here that Paul paints. Listen to it again, and then I'll give you something to imagine in your minds. Paul said, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body, all right, of him who is the head, that is Christ. I want you to picture this in your mind. I want you to picture a mature, normal-looking head with a puny, undersized, growth-stunted body. Okay, that's not funny, that's creepy. And that's exactly what you have when you have a church or a spiritual body who's not growing up. You have a normal-sized looking head with a puny body. And that's just not normal. And that's why Paul says we are to grow into a mature body that fits nicely underneath this mature head, Jesus. That's the goal, okay? I want to give us 10, and these go quickly, so don't freak out by the number 10. These go very quickly. 10 very practical aspects of good feedback. And I would really encourage you to write these down. Because, to be honest with you folks, this can't just be a sermon. This has to be a new way of life around here. All right? So number one, good aspects about good feedback. Number one, push into it. Don't back away. I know that's counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive for me. All right? Yes, there are some things you can overlook. There are some things you can say, I'd just rather be wrong. There are some things in that category. There are some things that are not in that category, and they have to be talked about. Push into it. Don't back away. Why? I think the reason why some of us do back away is because we're not sure how it's going to be received, right? All right? So just as we give feedback with humility and love and grace and everything else, we have to be able to receive feedback in humility and love and truth, right? If only one person is working off of the truth and the grace and the love, it's not going to work. The giver has to be coming from that posture, and the receiver has to be receiving it in that same posture. And when we know our feedback will be received in the same way that we're giving it, I think we're going to be able to push into it without fear of a negative or an explosive reaction. Does that make sense? Okay, number two. This is really important. Ask for feedback on a regular basis when things are not volatile and when there are no issues that are causing tension. Ask for it before someone feels the need to give it to you. And you're like, what? Yeah, I'm serious. Ask for it from the perspective of wanting to grow, of wanting to mature, of wanting to be the person that God created you to be. All right? Just for an example, we're going to have this yard sale in 2 weeks, and after the whole thing is over, Colin and I might pull us all together and say, hey, give us some honest feedback here. What was good? What wasn't? What do we need to think about next time? What do we, how did we all work together? Just instead of somebody going home and saying, oh, I wish Jamie would have done this, or he wouldn't have done that, or why did he say that? Do you understand where this is coming from? Ask for feedback before someone feels the need, or someone has so much tension built up into them that feedback turns into some type of a little explosion. Okay? Number three, offer feedback to someone from the perspective of expecting greatness from that person. not pointing out their faults and weaknesses. Okay, when you point out somebody's faults and weaknesses, that does not call them to greatness. Call them to greatness through your feedback. And ask yourself this question: what are the gifts of that person, and how can I encourage them to walk in them more fully? This is about their maturity, right? This is not about validating some annoyance that you have with another person. Number 4, good feedback includes both affirming and constructive information. And notice I said information, not criticism. Okay? Even when somebody offers us constructive criticism, we cringe, right? That comes off as a superior to an inferior. Feedback is not a conversation between somebody who's superior and someone who's inferior. Feedback is done between equals. Brothers and sisters in Christ who love each other. So include both affirming and constructive information when you're talking with that person. Number 5, we have to create a culture of this at Crossroads. In other words, when I say create a culture, I mean everybody has to do it. It won't work if just a handful of us enter into a vulnerable place with each other. And eventually, it's my dream to see this become a culture at Crossroads where we are just constantly giving each other good feedback, even though, as I'll get into here in the end, even though that might inflict a little bit of a wound from a friend. Okay? So we got to create a culture. Number 6, feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift. And when I give somebody a gift, what usually do they say after I give them a gift? Thank you. Thank you. Ha. Feedback is a gift. So when somebody gives you feedback, what do you say? Thank you. Your response to somebody's feedback should never be this reaction of trying to validate your actions or your words. You listen to feedback. You say, thank you. You might even say, you know what, I'm gonna take these things to God and ask Him about these things as well. And I only say this because I've been in this situation. You know, what you say outwardly may not totally run parallel with what's happening on the inside. Okay? I can say, thank you, I'll take this to God, while on the inside I'm saying, what the heck? You know, I'm offended. Okay, but the goal is to try to get your inner voice and your external voice saying the same thing. Yes, thank you. I know you want me to live up to what God has for me, and I will humbly consider what you said. Number 7, pray and check your intent before you give someone feedback. If your intent is to validate or justify yourself by giving somebody else feedback, then you need to back away until you can truly have that person's heart as your focus. Pray and check your intent. Number 8, write down these 4 letters. O-E-M-S. It doesn't spell anything. Don't try to figure it out. Okay? O-E-M-S. O stands for observation. Good feedback is giving somebody what you have observed. E, give examples. Don't be too general, get specific. M stands for me. In that conversation, you need to admit what you have done to contribute to this tension. And lastly, S is offer suggestions. Be helpful. Okay, just don't dump the whole farm on somebody and then walk away without offering some suggestions on how we can solve this. OEMS, observation, example, me, and suggestions. Number 9, in giving good feedback to each other, we fight for the integrity and testimony of Crossroads. This is a fight. This is a battle. And what we're fighting for is a good name. Not only for us, but for the name of Christ in our community. And number 10, we need to trust each other. We need to trust that giving good feedback is an important way of loving each other. We need to be able to look around this room and say, I trust these people. I love these people, and I trust that they want to bring the good out in me. You see, we live in a culture, my friends, where we value the people who tell us what we want to hear more than the people who tell us what we need to hear. And the best illustration of this, I'm sorry, but the best illustration of this is, and we've all been there, you're out in public, and a friend has the guts to tell you that you have a little piece of something stuck right there. Right? Have you ever had that happen? And then that could go even a level further when that friend actually has to help you get that little thing out because you just can't find it. Right? And you've been there as well. Feedback is this, and here's what we're shooting for, my friends. Feedback is this. I see something in you that's a little embarrassing that you can't see. Maybe it's a character flaw. Maybe it's just a little idiosyncrasy. Maybe it's a weakness of yours. Maybe it's an unhealthy tendency to do this or that. Perhaps it's sin. And I need to tell you about it, and I might even need to help you get it out of your life. You see, you just can't confront somebody or give somebody feedback and then say, all right, my job's over. No, you might actually have to step into that with them. Remember, this is not superiority looking down on someone who's inferior. Okay, the person who told you about the spinach between your teeth is not somehow better than you are because they saw it. So this is not about me being better than you. And then we've all been in that situation that after we got home from dinner out with friends, we discovered that little piece of spinach between our teeth when we looked in the mirror. And then we go to our husband or our wife or our roommate or somebody else and you say, did you know that was there? And they say, yeah, I just didn't want to say anything, you know. And you're like, I can't believe you let me go the whole evening with something stuck between my teeth. And my friends, as a body, as a spiritual family, we need to be able to look at each other and say, I can't believe we went to church together for 10 years and you never pointed that out to me. Because I couldn't see it. I'm too close to myself. We need to love each other so much that we can put our arms around each other and say, this is what I see. It's not because I'm better than you. And you know what? I might be wrong. I might be seeing this unclearly. Help me here. You see, this concept is not new. It's thousands and thousands of years old, and it was summed up nicely by the second wisest man that ever walked the earth. Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. This is a good kind of wound. It's a wound that shouts that this is a faithful friend. And even though a temporary wound has to be inflicted, there's an underlying and undeniable sense of faithfulness, not betrayal. Whatever this feedback or confrontation looks like, it feels loving and it feels compassionate and it feels like two faithful friends are together, maybe even weeping together. That faithful friend will not exploit your weakness or your faults or your sins. They will stick with you. They will not walk away. And they will humbly help you become more like Jesus. Can you imagine if that's our culture? Can you imagine that? That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I know all of us are a little nervous right now because we're like, who's going to give me feedback today? Right? If it comes, it has to be received in the spirit of everything we've talked about this morning. And maybe this has actually given you permission to say, okay, I really do need to step over that line with somebody. Maybe you have to, if they're not here today, maybe you have to explain a little bit about where you're coming from and how you're trying to do things differently. And how you're trying to come alongside them, not to exploit any of their weaknesses, but to say, you know what, I want to help us all grow into maturity. So that we have a mature body that fits nicely underneath our head, which is Jesus Christ.